Paris Trout is a masterful novel by Pete Dexter, an acclaimed American author renowned for his penetrating explorations of complex human characters and societal issues. This book, which received the National Book Award for Fiction, offers a profound look into the dynamics of a small southern community, highlighting the intricate interplay of social, racial, and psychological factors that shape individual lives and collective culture. Now, the book Paris Trout starts with Rosie Sawyers, a 14-year-old African-American girl being kicked out of her home and, via neo-familial proximity, ends up in the metaphorical and literal crosshairs of Paris Trout, a store owner and loan shark in Cotton Point, an antebellum town in Georgia during the year of 1949. He ends up shooting her and her caretaker over a debt owed by a member of the new household Rosie stays at. As Paris Trout is tried for his crime, he begins to go mentally insane, abusing his wife and nonetheless exuding rather strange behaviors such as covering the floor of his bedroom in glass panes and parking his car in front of a moving train, as well as becoming substantially more aloof from society in general. He is subsequently convicted of murder, but evades jail time through a series of judicial appeals and bribes. As the town's 150th anniversary comes up, a celebratory tradition results in Trout being humiliated in front of the town, angering him and moving him to attack. He picks up his paralyzed mother, shoots her on the second floor of a building, then he proceeds to kill 2 lawyers that tried to stop him, one of which was having an ongoing affair with his former wife, and then commits suicide, leaving his wife to fend for herself against the all-judging eyes of the people. As the author grew up in the midst of World War II, he was greatly influenced by the mindset and ideas that were perpetrated in the time, along with movements that were in effect of the war. These effects also increased the social gap and enhanced class struggle as the U.S. moved into a period of economic prosperity. Also, the movements perpetrated after these times, like in the 60s and 70s, also highlighted the issues in racism and segregation. These issues brought out the problems in the South's governmental systems, including the policies forced by the system, like Jim Crow laws, and the flaws in the biased judicial system. Keeping in line with the historical influences presented by the decade of the 1940s, the representation of the genders within Paris Trout can be seen by many as traditional. Although males are represented heavily within the book, with most of the story being focused on male characters, these characters and of themselves vary, with respect to the difference between what's observed within them and the values typically expected to be held by men at that time and place, to the point of spectacality, for it is a decent story after all. However, the extent to which female characters are explored, even in regards to how the time impacted their individual agencies, is limited, partly due to the fact that there are no sections of the book that are particularly dedicated to female characters, that is, except for one, Hannah Trout. Hannah goes against the grain in that she takes an effort to actually go through with divorcing Paris Trout, which was relatively unheard of at the time, and Melanie Stuart Miller's book titled The Mechanics of Domestic Power, Gender, Technology, and Advertising Since the 1970s, which examines how advertising has shaped and reflected gender roles in relation to domestic technologies, it is stated that, over the course of the 1980s and 1990s, more and more people began living on their own or in couples, independently of family groups. Increasing marriage ages, decreases in the average number of children per family, increasing divorce rates, and incredible growth in female employment have significantly influenced the constitution of the household. Albeit the information presented is a decent amount of time from when Paris Trout actually takes place, is very close to when the book was published, that being the year 1988, implying a greater amount of societal inspiration taken by the author to be used in the story, potentially at the cost of historical accuracy. The novel represents race in a clear and concise manner. Racial violence is viewed as an issue and the main source of the conflict. Racial violence, segregation, and injustice are shown as common, but disapproved of. Racial segregation is an issue, as it is what allows Trout to prey on African Americans. Trout, a despicable man, escapes justice because of institutional racism, the murder being overlooked because of the victim's race. The community ultimately responds by shunning and removing Trout from themselves because of these actions, beginning to show the effects of the movements and push for civil rights. Although the class difference again shows some racial bias, as a majority of the lower class are minorities, specifically African American, with most of them being uneducated, while the middle and higher classes are mostly white. In Michael Sorese's paper, The Evolution of White Racism and Its Impacts on Black Society in America Today, he discusses how racism affected African Americans, stating that, while right racist views and policies kept Black Americans from fully participating in American society, the activism and movements that challenged this oppression were able to make some strides, but were ultimately neutralized. The suppression of these groups coincided with the rush of drugs into urban ghettos. In response to the problems, the government would be blinded by racist assumptions and ignorance. These problems are exemplified in Dexter's novel, and were the main themes presented in the novel, as the government being blinded by their racism is what led to the events of the novel transpiring. In the novel, there's a very present social divide between the classes. While the lower class, being mainly African American in race, lives in poverty and suffers from harsh conditions, a lack of education, and rampant crime, the middle and upper class white citizens live in peace and prosperity, having access to basic utilities and amenities that are absent in the lower class areas. These biases continue into the legal system, as it is heavily skewed towards the favor of the upper classes and ignores the lower class. Due to all of these factors, there is a large amount of crime in the area, being much different and much broader than those committed in the other classes, along with motives that can be from survival to spite. This all leads into a completely new culture being formed in these areas with different values, habits, and traditions than the upper classes ever had. So yeah, pretty good book, would not read again.